You're watching Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible Study for the 21st Century. So welcome to JCT TV, friends. And again, we've got a lot of new viewers because we're on more networks than ever before. And so if you're watching for the first time, welcome. Good to have you with us. I'm Jim Cantelon. We have now for almost 5 years been just going through the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. It's a very slow and satisfying process. I take as much time as I got to take. And between that and reaching out to orphans and widows through WOW, working for orphans and widows, we're trying to do the job.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
Now, last time I pointed out, and I'll just do it again briefly, that when you read the Gospels, especially Luke, you should not be looking for a linear or chronological progression. That's just not the case. There's anecdotes, there's teaching segments, there's various parabolic elements that are just kind of thrown in as Luke chooses to do it. But this is not, the story of Jesus from the perspective of someone who followed him around from day to day to day and gave a day to day to day journal. That's just not the case at all. And so, as I said last time, Luke 12 is a case in point where we are right now. It's a little bit of, watching a tennis match. Over here, over there, over here, over there. And this is a case in point as we pick it up here in verse 35. This is a teaching of Jesus, and Luke does not give us the context. We can assume that it follows what he's been saying in verses 22 through 34 about anxiety and how we should be free of worry. But it's not necessarily following directly after that, even though in the gospel here, it is recorded in that way. Okay? So, let your waist be girded and your lamps burning. That's verse 35. 36. And you yourselves be like men who wait for their master when he'll return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open to him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the master, when he comes, will find watching. Assuredly, I say to you that he will gird himself and have them sit down to eat, and will come and serve them. And if he should come in the second watch or come in the third watch and find them so, blessed are those servants. But know this, if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. And Peter said to him, Lord, do you speak this parable only to us or to all people? The Lord said, who then is that faithful and wise servant, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will make him ruler over all that he has. But if that servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and be drunk, the master of that servant will come in a day when he's not looking for him, an hour when he's not aware, and will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will shall be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know yet committed things deserving of stripes, so he was beaten with few. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed of him, they will ask the more. Now, much of this passage is quite obscure and very much expressive, if you will, of the culture of the day. So, I refer to some of it, but I really want to get to the essential meaning of this passage. But as I say, it is a bit obscure, but it gains a touch of clarity if you take the time. I won't do it now, but you can, to read it in the light of chapter 17 of Luke, verses 20 to 37. This coming that Jesus talks about is referred to as the parousia in the Greek. It refers to the coming of the kingdom of God and or the second coming of Jesus Christ, the coming of the Son of Man to cleanse the earth and to establish the kingdom of heaven once and for all. And it's very much on Jesus' mind as he instructs his disciples about watchfulness. And that's really what he's getting at here, is watchfulness. Watchfulness with regard to anticipating, looking forward to the parousia, is a part of the overall worldview that a man or a woman of faith has. We look at ourselves not just in terms of how things are today and where we are today, but we also believe that we are on a journey somewhere, a destination. There is a horizon that we're pursuing, an end zone, if you will, if you want to use the analogy of a football game. That is our motivating force. So watchfulness then is a part of that big picture worldview. There's more to this life than meets the eye, in other words. Well, the disciples needed to know for sure that there was more to the kingdom of heaven than signs and wonders and profound teaching, as marvelous as that was. History was certainly being made, and they were seeing it being made before their very eyes. But there was an eschatological process at work. And if you're not too sure about eschatology refers to the doctrine of the end of days, or the end times, or that which lies beyond space and time in God's plan for the universe. Eschatology. Go and study that in theology in seminary next time you go. But God had a plan that would reach far beyond the end of days. That's eschatology for you. The new age was coming, and Jesus would usher it in. This would be his second coming, when all things in heaven and earth would be brought to completion, and everything would be made new. That's eschatology. It's also a part of the watchfulness component of a Christian worldview. Now, it's interesting that Jesus, and not so much the disciples, but Jesus had a sense of urgency about him. To him, the end of days was right here, okay? Remember, Jesus is coming into space and time out of the eternities, and he knows something about what's to be that no human being could ever comprehend. And there should be a sense of urgency there. It's like if you know what's about to happen in some context, and those who don't know at this point seem to be blissfully unaware and unconcerned, you want to warn them. You want to, give them a heads up because you're concerned about them. Well, this was certainly the case here, and unlike his disciples, his vision was not shrouded by the space-time filter. Whether the new age was 20 minutes away or 20 millennia away, for that matter, mankind and the world were on the razor's edge of eternity. And you had to stay alert. Watchfulness. Now, just a comment here. When you study history in school, it's so easy to go from one millennium to the next, or from one period of 500 years to the next period of 500 years. And the teacher talks about it, the authors write about it as if it were from day to day. You know, King David, he wrote his Psalms and he reigned in Judah and Israel 500 years after Moses. 500 years. We read it in the Bible and it's like day to day. Not day to day, friends. There's a sense from our perspective that time is forever, but from God's perspective, 500 years, 1,000 years is not just day to day, it's moment to moment. Difficult to conceive this, but eternity is timeless. There is no yesterday with eternity. There's no tomorrow with eternity. Eternity is now, all the time. And it's tough to get one's mind around that. Jesus had no problem with that, but this certainly lent urgency to his message. Well, as he's talking to his disciples about watchfulness, he gives 3 parables. The first is about the waiting servants. The second is about the householder and the thief. And the third is about the faithful and unfaithful servants. Now, I just read it, but here's the point. All 3 stress the shortness of time and the need to be on watch. You know, when I was a kid growing up in a Pentecostal preacher's home, I'm exaggerating, but I have a hard time remembering any service of any kind at any time during the year, whether it was Christmas or Easter, or whether it was some special event, you know, a funeral, a wedding. I don't remember the preachers, most of the time it was my own dad, who ever were able to avoid or walk away from the doctrine of Jesus is coming soon. There was this sense of the imminence of Christ's return. I went to a seminary in preparation for the ministry. And the first year and a half, I was in an old building in that seminary that had been built right after the Second World War out of second and third hand materials. Because why should we spend money on new material when Jesus is coming back by 1956 for sure? And you know, we've just had 2 world wars and the time is short and Jesus is at the door. So let's spend our money on getting out the message, winning the world to Jesus before the end. Imminence, sense of Jesus is coming soon. Watchfulness. Now we've lost that, but we need to be instructed by it. I'll comment further on it right after this break.
Assure you from the inside it is happening. God is our hope. God is all we believe in, this God. And he has called us to be the repairers of wars and to take care of the widow and the orphan in their time of need. And that is exactly what we do. Lives are changing. Why? Because Jesus is Lord. And why? Because Christians have come together as a body. The united body of Christ is coming and saying, it stops with this generation. We break it and we move on.
The kind of religion that God endorses is to care for orphans and widows in their distress, justice, and to keep oneself unpolluted from the world, righteousness.
So as we talk about watchfulness and the anticipation, the expectation of the second coming, the return of Christ, the parousia, the hope of the church, as it's called, Jesus says something very interesting. He says in verse 35, let your waist be girded and your lamps burning. In the NIV it says, be dressed ready for service and keep your lamps burning. What's up with lamps and girded waists? In Jesus' time, it's the case in many parts of the world even to this day, men used to wear long robes. I remember when I was pastoring in Jerusalem, Israel, I even had my own, as it was called in Arabic, galabia, a long white cotton, it's like a long shirt, really is what it was, right down to my ankles. And those things are so cool when it's, well over 100 degrees, and the desert sun is beating down upon you. I didn't wear it often, but I would sometimes wear it around the house. But if you had to walk fast or run, you couldn't do it because this thing is right down around your ankles. And so what you would do in Jesus' time is you would pull it up part way and you would tie a sash around it, and that was known as girding your waist or girding your loins. And then you were free, to move about. What Jesus is saying here is, be unencumbered. Don't load your life down with things that will hold you back. This is pretty profound because, in our culture, more things, more better, right? I mean, you watch TV commercials, and if you were to buy everything that you're told you need, you'd be bankrupt within a year, but you'd also not be able to contain everything in your house. We don't need most of what people tell us we need. And yet if you conform to the acquisitiveness of our secular culture, you become laden down. There's an old adage that says, to the extent you own things, you're owned. Isn't that true? Like me, you've been watching some of the disasters that our world is suddenly experiencing. Wildfires like we've never seen them before, temperatures like we've never seen them before, flooding, landslides, earthquakes, and watching the footage of a recent flood in Germany and parts of France and Austria and Switzerland and Netherlands. From one moment to the next, you see people who've got a house full of goods and they've escaped with the clothes on their back, and that's all they now own. Just from one minute to the next. Life is pretty tenuous. And yet we'll burden ourselves down with stuff. We'll mortgage our future for stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a mortgage on your house, but you understand what I'm saying. Sometimes we'll, live way beyond our means just to have stuff. Jesus says, travel lightly through this world. Not only is it good for your health, both physically and spiritually, but also it can be a metaphor for the expectation that you're soon going to be called upward, into the presence of the Almighty. And in that case, naked you were born and naked you will return. I mean, stuff means nothing then. So, gird up your loins, let your waist be girded, and your lamps burning. What's that all about? It suggests that the master in the parables that he told come back when they're not expected, meaning at night. And sometimes the servants who should be waiting are asleep. And to go to sleep, you got to turn out your oil lamp, right? It's just a thing you do when you're asleep. Who wants light on in the room when you're asleep? Jesus says, stay awake. That's basically what he's saying. Your lamp's burning, stay awake. Keep your eyes open. Watch the signs of the times. What's going on in this world? Is there anything that would indicate to you that Jesus is coming soon? And if you have a sense that he's coming soon, don't be dogmatic about it. Don't be in your face about it with your friends and neighbors and family, but just travel lightly and be prepared for that marvelous moment when Jesus will appear. That's essentially the message here, and it is really a message worth hearing. And he also says, to the extent that you're warned, you'll be held accountable. That's the whole point of verses 47 and 48. Accountability is directly related to education, if you will, information, revelation. You can't be held accountable for that which you do not know. And that's what Jesus is saying in verses 47 and 48. Okay, let's move on. To verse 49, I think we'll pick it up. Here we go. I came to send fire on the earth. And how I wish it were already kindled. See, even Jesus was, not impatient, but he had this sense of urgency. I have a baptism to be baptized with. He's referring to his coming crucifixion. How distressed I am till it is accomplished. Do you suppose I came to give peace on the earth? I tell you, not at all, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2, 2 against 3. Father will be divided against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And then he also said to the multitudes, whenever you see a cloud rising out of the west, immediately you say a shower is coming, and so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, you say there will be hot weather, and there is. Hypocrites! You can discern the face of the sky and the earth, but how is it you do not discern this time? Yes, and why, even of yourselves, do you not judge what is right? When you go with your adversary to the magistrate, make every effort along the way to settle with him, lest he drag you to the judge. The judge deliver you to the officer throw you in prison. I tell you, you'll not depart from there until you've paid the last mite. Jesus knew that he was a polarizing figure. His words, his works divided nations and families. They still do to this day. And by his own admission, he came, as he puts it very metaphorically, to cast fire upon the earth. His death, referring to his crucifixion and burial, would divide the saved from the damned. No political correctness here. But as already stated in verses 47 and 48, judgment would be relative to knowledge. But you can be sure the disciples were struck to the heart. Am I in or am I out? Am I in or am I out? Isn't that the big question? I remember it wasn't uncommon when I was a kid. My father often would have visiting speakers coming through. Sometimes they'd come through for a weekend. Sometimes they'd come through for a couple of weeks. They'd have meetings every night of the week. But I often, as a kid, would hear various speakers say, as if they were saying it for the first time, so where will you be when Jesus comes again? Will he know your name? Are you in or are you out? And I know that in this very inclusive world of ours, we don't like to talk in those terms. We don't like to talk in terms of anyone being out. We like to talk in terms of everybody being in. But the scripture is very clear. There are believers and there are unbelievers. And why would we even presume that an unbeliever would want to enter the kingdom of heaven? Time and again, you see this in various novels and essays and philosophical dissertations. Unbelievers, sometimes bold-faced atheists, saying, I'm not interested in this. I don't want this pie in the sky when you die by and by stuff. When I die, I'm dead, I'm gone. I don't want any of this other stuff. I'm not interested. I don't want to go to heaven. And of course, heaven doesn't exist in their thinking. But even if it were to exist, I don't want to go there. I want to be with my friends in hell. I've heard this myself. Pretty foolish talk. We've been created in the image of God. We have a homing instinct. Have you ever wondered about monarch butterflies or hummingbirds? I mean, these little creatures that migrate all the way from South America, or in the butterfly's case, from Mexico, all the way up into the Rockies in the northern states and central Canada. In my backyard right now, there are a few butterflies flitting around, and they have flown all the way from Mexico, where they migrate for and they hibernate for 5 or 6 months a year during the wintertime. In their billions I've seen pictures of it. I've seen documentaries on it. Trees that are just absolutely laden with semi-comatose, more dead than alive monarchs. How do they do it? Especially keeping in mind that the monarchs create their next generation of monarchs on the way back to Canada, back to the States, and these new creatures, these new monarchs, fly back to Mexico even though they weren't born there. How do they do that? How do salmon go for thousands of miles after birth, down the streams where they respond, out into the ocean, and then come back to where they respond? They have a homing instinct, a great mystery. Friends, you and I have a homing instinct. We were made for heaven. And if you want to spend the rest of your life never going home, that to me is the great dread of the biblical teaching about hell. To be forever separated from home, from the one who made us, to me is beyond comprehension.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
Friends, if you would like to get a bit more of JCT, only not on your television screen or your computer, but in a book, you can go to your favorite online retailer. You know, they all have it. Just type in Cantelon's Casual Commentary. And I've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John there. It's 520 pages. It's a hardcover. It's a beautifully published book. And it will really help you fill in the blanks in terms of some of the material that I am very quickly covering, on the program. I mean, television is television, and there's always time constraints. And so it's a touch frustrating for me, but on the other hand, if I can kind of whet your appetite to get into the Bible for yourself, and then you use Cantelon's Casual Commentary as a kind of an assist, your chances of becoming biblically literate are pretty good. Thanks for watching JCT. Don't forget about Working for Orphans and Widows, our work overseas.